Whoever steps foot there at this hour either never returns or returns with a fear that is forever locked in their eyes. Wow. Just let that sink in for a second. That is not just some idle threat to scare kids, it is the literal dark heart of the local legend we are diving into today.
Picture the scene. It's the dead of winter, pitch black outside. This rural village has been totally crushed by an unforgiving drought. And to make matters worse, they've been without electricity for days. The tension is palpable. The whole village feels like it's just holding its breath in this absolute silence. And right in the middle of this desperate reality is our guy, Govind. He's a farmer pushed right to the absolute edge. So when that power finally flickers back on in the middle of the night, he's faced with a massive choice.
Welcome back. Today, we're doing a deep dive explainer on the source material behind the infamous Secret of the Old Wellfield. We're going to break down exactly how mundane, everyday desperation violently collides with ancient dread. We'll look at the psychology, the environmental cues, and honestly, the sheer terror of this narrative.
What makes this story so fascinating is this core conflict right here. Mundane reality versus a very real supernatural threat. See, Govind isn't out looking for trouble. He's just a desperate farmer. His crops are literally dying, the power's been out for days, so when it finally comes back on, his brain goes straight to survival mode. That practical need to save his livelihood completely blinds him. He can't see the ancient, shadowless evil lurking by the old well on his land. It's tragic, really. His very real-world problem stops him from seeing the massive red flags that are practically screaming in his face.
And speaking of red flags, this story perfectly illustrates the classic horror rule of three. The legend doesn't just throw Govind straight into the dark, it actually gives him three distinct, clear chances to turn around. It's wild to track how he stubbornly ignores this escalating series of dire warnings from the people around him. First, he gets warned by Birju Chacha at the local shop. Then his own wife, Madri, begs him to stay home. And finally, he has the super intense confrontation with the village elder, Dadaji, out on the dark path. Let's actually break these down, because the escalation here is absolutely masterful.
Okay, so warning number 1. Govind is buying fish from Birju Chacha when the power suddenly surges back. But pay close attention to the environment here. The overhead bulb doesn't just snap on, it flickers unreliably. And actually, the moment Govind mentions his plan to go to the old well field, the light physically dims. Then out of nowhere, this unnatural, biting cold wind sweeps through. Birju Chacha leans in and drops this hushed reminder of a dark event from exactly 2 years ago, telling him point blank that the field is no longer fit for the living. But Govind? Yeah, he just brushes it off as local superstition.
Next up, Govind heads home and runs into his wife, Madhuri. She delivers warning number 2, and she perfectly nails that creeping psychological dread. She tells him, fear is never without reason. Sometimes the heart grows heavy without a cause. This is a huge shift. Birju Chacha gave him environmental clues and history, but Madhuri's warning is pure, raw intuition. It's this intense gut feeling that going out tonight is a terrible mistake. But with the image of his dying crops locked in his head, Govind literally just grabs his shovel and walks out the door anyway.
So he's on his way, bumps into his buddy Vikash, and they head out together. Which brings us to the third, and honestly most explicit warning from Dadaji, the village elder. Dadaji stops them and points out something super unsettling. Even the village dogs have stopped barking. In global folklore, dead silence from animals is a universal sign that something unnatural is nearby. Dadaji doesn't mince words. He tells them there's an entity at the well, and it leaves absolutely no shadow. The stakes? You either vanish entirely or you come back with your mind completely shattered. But Govind, leaning on his modern logic and the fact that it's his property, basically tells Dadaji he doesn't have time for ghost stories.
Now what happens next is what we call the deceptive calm. As Govind and Vikash walk those narrow, empty village alleys toward the field, they hit this wall of deep sensory deprivation. No animal sounds, nothing. Just these dim, weak yellow bulbs and the heavy thud of their own boots on the dirt. You know that feeling when it's just too quiet? That unnatural silence is specifically designed to lower a victim's guard. The environment itself is isolating them, prepping them for what's waiting out there in the dark.
They finally reach the field, and honestly, at first, everything goes exactly to plan. Step 1, they get to the dark field. Step 2, Govind walks up to the ancient tree where the heavy iron motor box is mounted and flips the rusted switch. Step 3, with a huge mechanical clatter, the water actually starts flowing into the dry earth. And then, step 4, the fatal mistake. Govind leaves Vikash alone by the tree while he goes down to the lower field to check the embankments. It's a textbook false sense of security, and it is terrifying.
And guys, this next part is arguably the most brilliant juxtaposition in the entire narrative. Left all alone in the quiet, Vikash pulls out his phone to kill time. And what does he watch? Digital horror. He's literally streaming fake ghost videos from a channel called Hanisha Tunes. So picture this. He's glued to this glowing artificial screen, listening to fake screams and cheesy digital sound effects. Meanwhile, completely unnoticed, a very real, ancient, suffocating darkness is physically enveloping the tree right behind him. He's sitting there consuming fake fear while actual physical terror is breathing right down his neck.
And then, the motor stopped. No winding down, just sudden, absolute, dead silence. That heavy, comforting thud of the machinery simply vanished into thin air, plunging the entire field into a deafening quiet.
Govind comes rushing back up from the lower field, totally annoyed. He assumes Vikash is messing around with the machinery, which Vikash frantically swears he isn't. And right here is where Govind makes two doomed attempts to force that rusted switch back on. Two attempts that completely seal their fate. Govind reaches up for the heavy metal start switch. He presses it hard. We hear this sharp, harsh, mechanical snap. Cut! The motor roars to life, but only for exactly 1 second. And then, violently, another cut as the switch physically snaps itself back down against Govind's hand. This wasn't a power surge. Something in the dark is actively, physically turning the machine off.
Frustrated and probably a little panicked now, Govind goes for attempt number 2. And this is when the entity violently manifests in 3 rapid, terrifying steps. First, an unbearable wave of cold hits, literally freezing Govind before his fingers can even touch the metal. Second, an invisible physical force violently shoves him backward off his feet, and at that exact split second, Vikash, who is watching all this from just a few feet away, sees a dark, shadowless silhouette physically manifest and cover the switchboard.
And if that visual wasn't enough to make you run, the nightmare suddenly becomes purely auditory. Coming from inside the heavy, locked metal motor box mounted to the tree is a sound. Scratch, scratch. The slow, deliberate sound of fingernail scraping against solid iron. Think about that for a second. The scratching isn't coming from the outside. Something is trapped or hiding inside that tiny metal box, and it's trying to get out. Whatever false bravery they had left completely shatters. Govind and Vikash do the only logical thing. They run. They run blindly along those narrow mud embankments in pitch blackness, absolutely terrified to cast even a single glance backward. And as they scramble desperately toward the distant, weak lights of the village, that deafening silence of the field is finally broken by a deformed, echoing, wicked laugh that literally chases them all the way home. Now, they survived the night, but the story doesn't just end there. It actually birthed a lasting local legend. Rumor has it, neither Govind nor Vikash ever stepped foot in that field again. The land itself became known as cursed, specifically tied to the lunar cycle. The locals say the entity is tied to Amavasya, the new moon night. It's the absolute darkest night of the lunar month, and it's supposedly the exact time when this shadowless entity is at the absolute peak of its power.
The legend claims that on the night of Amavasya, if you dare to walk past that old well field, you won't just hear the wind and the trees. You'll hear the very distinct sound of fingernails scratching against metal coming from inside the motor box, followed by a voice whispering in the dark, begging for water. So, I'll leave you with this one final thought. If you're ever walking alone in the dark and you hear that scratching, will you answer?